like to welcome you to the Board of Adjustments meeting for the City of Wilmington. Today is Thursday, August 17th, 2023. The time is 1:01. Before we get started, I'm going to read the Board of Adjustments introduction. Hearings before the Board of Adjustment are quasi-judicial in nature. Decisions of the board are based on the record of these proceedings. To grant a variance requires a concurrent vote of 4/5 of the members of the board. To reverse or modify determination of an administrative official requires a simple majority. Evidence submitted to the board for review becomes part of the record. The appeals of a board decision are to Superior Court and are based on the record. Appeals must be filed within 30 days of the date of the filing of the board's order in the Planning Division. A hearing before the board is conducted in accordance with rules of procedure. Those who want to testify in a case are sworn as witnesses. The chairperson recognizes those who want to testify and their attorney for representation of evidence during the hearing. To ensure that all testimony is properly recorded, you would come forward, state your address, and state your name, and then speak clearly. Better than I just did that. Before we get started, do you want to swear in anyone?
All right, if everyone, staff, applicants, member of the public who wish to speak, do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Our next item will be the approval of the minutes from our July 20th, 2023 meeting. Entertain a motion for approval.
Approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Those minutes pass. We'll move to our first old business item. It involves 3714-A Wrightsville Avenue. It is a request for a variance for a rear setback for a single dwelling structure. Start out with the city's staff. Catherine?
Thank you, Chairman Havas. This is for 3714A and 3714B Wrightsville Avenue. The request is for two variances to the rear yard setbacks for an existing single dwelling structure and a proposed one. The subject property is zoned multiple dwelling 17 residential district, and the existing residential structure is shown on the screen in front of you towards the front of the lot. The applicant has proposed to subdivide the existing parcel into two lots with a 20-foot wide private access easement into the rear lot that would come off of Wrightsville Avenue. There's currently a 10-foot public alley to the rear of the lot that does not provide dedicated access for any of the existing or proposed lots. The applicant has proposed to construct a single dwelling structure on the rear of the lot, which would be on lot 35B as shown in your attachment 3 and also shown on the screen in front of you. Pursuant to Land Development Code Section 1828, multiple dwelling dimensional standards, within the multiple dwelling district, the front setback is 10 feet, the interior side setbacks are 5 feet, the corner side setback, which would include along the private access easement, is 10 feet, and the rear setback is 15 feet. So neither the existing structure nor the proposed second dwelling would meet the required 15-foot rear yard setbacks. On June 5th, the applicant submitted an application for a variance to those setbacks to allow the existing house to remain and to divide the lot to create a second parcel with a new dwelling unit. This item was originally set for hearing before the Board of Adjustment last month, but was continued to allow for a full complement of the board. The applicant is present to provide you with an additional presentation.
All right.
I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have of staff.
Does anyone have any questions so far? All right, thank you. Show John Yurko. Would you like to come up and give us some additional? You can come right up front here. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for consideration of this variance request. My name is John Yurko, and I'm Ms. Hughes' architect. And I'm a former long-term volunteer of my county's Board of Adjustment.
And just for the record, can you state your legal address?
6 Dula Springs Road, Weaverville, North Carolina.
All right, thank you, sir.
Asheville area. My experience on the Board of Adjustment, I'm aware of the challenges of the variance process and the challenge of showing hardship, not of our own doing, and so we're prepared to do that today. Ms. Hughes is not a developer. She is a single mother who has already invested heavily in the property, extensively renovating the house on Lot A. And her goal on the project is to continue with this commitment while providing a housing solution for her family. In planning this project, there were a number of directions to take, and on examination of the site plan, some of those may be evident, but we're here to answer questions about that. We chose a design solution that takes into account the spirit of the LDC, and that is not contrary to the public interest, to quote the ordinance. So we feel there are two key considerations of this variance request. The first one is the existence of the 10-foot alley to the rear. This is a city-owned property that's non-functional, as was stated previously. It doesn't circulate, it's overgrown, it doesn't appear to serve any drainage or stormwater functions. And it frankly should probably be closed for tax-based reasons. The variance application requests that we be allowed to measure our rear yard setback from the center line of that alley, that 10-foot alley. And if that is allowed, our variance requests ask for a 4'3" reduction in the 15-foot setback in the rear. That reduction would be from 15 to 10'9". If the board or if this proceeding does not allow us to measure from the center line of the alley, then our variance request is 5 feet greater. It's a 9'3" reduction in the rear yard setback from 15 feet to 5'9". The second relevant matter on this is the preservation of an extremely healthy and large tree, which you see on your site plan. It's kind of adjacent to the single car parking space. Yes, sir, right there. That's a large tree, and we printed out some photographs of that area if you'd like to see them. That tree is really a major factor in citing this house and addresses the non-compliance of the setback, the proposed property line between the two properties. As you can see in the plan, we have 12'3". The proposed property line is 12'3" from the back property line. I also show a 15-foot setback on that adjacent property, and it's undetermined, at least from our standpoint, whether that's considered a front yard or a side yard, but in either case, 15 feet is larger than is required. So to break this down, we feel that the variance request on the rear yard allows us to keep the house as far away from that tree as possible, and that's one of our major goals with this placement. The spirit of the LDC with regard to a rear yard and a side yard, or a rear yard and a front yard, the spirit of that is to achieve 25 feet of separation, which we have between these two buildings. We have actually 27 feet separation. Ms. Hughes has spoken to all her adjacent neighbors, and all are in support of this variance, at least expressed verbally. And so in summary, we wish to move forward with the plans and respectfully request approval of this variance based on those two factors. And of course, we're available to answer any questions about the application.
All right, questions?
Have you considered an accessory dwelling unit rather than subdividing the lot?
We have. There's limitations on the ADU of 30% of the square footage, which is prohibitively small in size, or the 900 square foot maximum, and neither met the Ms. Hughes' goals for the project.
How large is the proposed structure?
Excuse me?
How large is the proposed structure?
It's 1,100 square feet. There should be a label on the house plan. I would also point out that the design of the dwelling, if you look on the entry side, it's a porch, and that porch does encroach on the drip line of that house by a couple of feet. The hard corner of that house is outside the drip line, and the design intent, and it's noted in our construction drawings that, assuming this is approved, that that corner column of the porch be hand dug to make sure that there's limited, if no jeopardy to that tree.
You said you had photos of the tree?
Excuse me?
You said you had photos of the tree in
Yes.
question? Do you want to go ahead and, it's worth us looking at them. While we're going, does anyone have some other questions?
I have,
Yep.
to preemptively address the issue of building up versus out. We have investigated that, and we've actually made a model of the two options, a house that is smaller in footprint but built taller. We feel like that is contrary to the spirit of the neighborhood, if not the language of the ordinance, and it's a much more vertically imposing structure to do so. So we feel that the single-story solution is much more in spirit with the neighborhood, certainly. And I have images if you would like to see that, and we can enter that into evidence.
You're welcome to enter them in. And does anyone like to consider those? Yeah, yes, sir. You want to go ahead and give those to Casey? All right. While we'll review those, do you have any more information?
No, I do have images of what a larger house would be, but I think that's irrelevant at this
Probably.
point.
All right. Does anyone have any questions of the applicant at this time? Does the city have any questions of the applicant?
I will just note that we haven't discussed the presence of the tree previously. However, city code does allow for some modification to setbacks and to allow for tree save, provided that that tree is protected by some sort of a deed restriction or something.
Okay, thank you.
I think I'll speak for the owner in that we would accept that condition.
Thank you.
All right. Questions so far? Anybody? All right, thank you, sir. We'll probably have some more as we go on, but thank you so far. All right. Nothing else from the city right now?
Nothing further from the
Okay.
city.
All right, we'll go ahead and open the evidentiary hearing. This is open to non-parties, and we would ask that they introduce information that's competent, material, or substance and relevant to this matter. If anyone would like to come forward, please do so at this time. All right. All right, there doesn't appear to be any. For the city, anything else you'd like to add while we're in the public or the evidentiary?
Nothing more from the city. I mean, I would just note that the neighbors' feelings on the matter, the neighbors are not here to state their opinions, and so that would be considered hearsay, but I'm sure that the board would give it appropriate weight.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody have any questions for the city while we're in the public hearing, or evidentiary hearing, sorry? Anyone have any questions of the applicant while we're in? All right, go ahead and close the evidentiary hearing. We'll go on to if there's any rebuttals from either side. Is there anything else to add from applicant-wise, like as far as the closing? All right, anything from city?
No, the presence of the tree may negate the need for a variance on the newly created lot. However, a variance would still be required for a new property line for the existing house. So I would suggest that the board act on both variances or each variance separately.
Right. All right, thank you. If there isn't anything else, we'll close those and we'll go into deliberations related to the variance. Thoughts?
I have a difficult time with the four findings of fact on this one because, to me, it's really more a variance of convenience because neither property will meet the required setbacks once we have one conforming property into two non-conforming properties. And I just, my opinion is I think this is a variance of convenience rather than meeting the four findings of fact.
Anybody else thoughts?
I would tend to agree with that. I think there's definitely other ways around this to create a second unit on the property there without having to divide it into two non-conforming lots, like was discussed earlier in ADU and back there.
I think it's a pretty substantial request because if I heard it correctly, they're going from the alley line and not the actual property line. Is that right?
They're measuring the rear setback from the property line rather than, they would have their rear setback plus that 10-foot alley between them and an adjoining property to the rear.
Right, if we go from the, I think you said we go from the midline of the alley, it's a 4'3" variance, but if we don't include the alleyway, it's a 9'3" variance.
I do like the fact that they have the building where it is or the home where it is to save the tree. And I think if we were going to do something, I think that would need to be a stipulation for the variance request.
And it was brought up by the city to act on two variances.
Yep.
Maybe we could have the city verify, like outline how they would, where they see those, just so we have the language related to the two actions.
You could consider the first variance, 3714A Wrightsville Avenue, to the rear setback for the existing house, and then the second variance would be for a different address. It'd be for the 3714B Wrightsville Avenue.
I just don't think we're meeting the four findings of fact in this case. I don't see it.
Any other discussion, or does anyone have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion that we deny the variance request on 3714 Wrightsville Avenue for failure to meet the four findings of fact.
There's a motion, is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, it's been properly seconded. All those in favor of denying the variance, say aye.
Aye.
Any of those that oppose the motion?
Nay.
That is 4-1. It has been denied. All right, thank you. The city will help you in the back with that. All right, we're going to move on to old business item number 2. There's been a mention that one of the members may need to recuse. Okay. Is there, as far as, we're going to be 4 people versus 5, so.
So we need to just make sure that the applicant wants to proceed? Okay.
All right, thanks. So we're good to move forward. All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Presenting you item number 2, 525 Ponderosa Drive. The subject property is zoned R15, moderate density single dwelling district, and contains a single-family structure that has been proposed for demolition to facilitate the development of the subject property into 6 lots and construct a new city street. The subject property contains a 28-inch diameter at breast height, longleaf pine tree, which is a specimen tree to LDC Section 18-316, Attachment 3. Land Development Code 18-316B2 states that removal of specimen trees shall be authorized by waiver from the Board of Adjustment. Development of the site will necessitate the removal of 6 regulated trees in addition to the 28-inch DBH longleaf pine. The applicant states that removal of the trees is necessary to accommodate essential site improvements. The applicant has proposed to preserve 2 large oak trees that were identified by the applicant as more viable species assets. The location of the specimen tree is close to the underground septic system and adjacent structure's foundation, both of which will negatively impact the root zone of the subject tree. On or about June 5th, 2023, the applicant submitted an application for a variance to tree preservation to allow for the removal of 1 specimen tree in the R15 Moderate Density Single Dwelling District pursuant to City Code Chapter 18, Land Development Code Section 18-316. The applicant has proposed that as a condition of approval, they must retain a 25-inch DBH live oak that is located on proposed Lot 6. Should the board approve the requested variance with the condition that this tree shall be retained, such protection shall be recorded in the New Hanover County Register of Deeds as a deed restriction for Lot 6, which is also on Attachment 3. The applicant is also required to retain an 18-inch DBH live oak and a 37-inch DBH water oak, both located within the project's required open space. LDC Section 18-316F requires that removal of a protected tree shall be mitigated at 200% and shall consist of the same or comparable species as those removed. Mitigation of a 28-inch DBH longleaf pine requires planting 56 caliper inches comparable tree species on the site. This matter was set before hearing on the Board of Adjustment for July 20th, 2023, and subsequently continue to the August 17th, 2023 meeting due to not having a full complement of the board. A couple other notes to add. This project has went before the Planning Board and were given positive recommendations, and also has went before the DAC. This property, or this case, is subject to the 4 findings of fact, and I submit all materials in this presentation into the record. Staff is available for answers. The applicant is present as well.
Does anyone have any questions at this point? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Acknowledge the applicant.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Wolf, and I'm here with Tim Johnson, the owner of the property. The more current aerial photograph from, I think, January of this year shows that there are only a handful of trees on this site. The 28-inch longleaf pine that we're talking about is shown on this slide. The house that is there has been vacant and is unoccupied. It will be demolished. It's on a crawl space, and certainly that pine, which you can see both totally and up close to the house, is very close to the house. The roots have already started encroaching in under the structure. So, and there is a septic system in this adjacent yard in the picture, basically. So we believe certainly that when that demolition occurs, we are concerned about the long-term health and viability of this pine anyway. That being said, we went into the site looking at the trees that were there and how we could work with them. Our first intention was to pretty much bisect those oak trees and that pine and see if we could get the roadway in between them, but we believe that that would severely have compromised the 2 oak trees. So this is where the pine would occur. Had we taken the road totally past that pine to avoid it that way, it certainly would have reasonably reduced the amount of usable area for the sake of a longer street. So these are the 2 oaks, the 37-inch water oak shown, and although the other one is labeled as an 18-inch, it is actually a multi-stem with several 18-inch stems coming out of it. These are the two trees that would be preserved in an open space area and be preserved as part of a condition of the rezoning. So this is what we've basically got to work with when it's all over and done with. If it's possible to take out that pine, as Chris pointed out, it would be mitigated at 200%, which would translate into probably 28 new trees. It would certainly provide reasonable justice for the property owner to pursue the use of the entire site. And we believe that the two oaks, plus the others that are shown on this plan and dedicated for preservation as part of the rezoning, would all be offsets to work out the entire situation. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions at this time? All right, thank you. All right. Anything from the city related to what was presented? All right, thank you. We'll move on to the evidentiary hearing. It's opened up for parties that have anything that's relevant or substantive in evidence related to this matter. Is there anyone that'd like to come forward? All right, not seeing that we'll have any, we'll move on. Is there anything else from the city related to the request?
No, sir.
You're good? All right. Anything from the applicant? You're good? All right, we'll go ahead and close the evidentiary hearing. Being that there's no further information, we'll close that and we'll move on to deliberations.
I went out and looked at the property, and I think the two oak trees are much more significant than the pine, and the pine is really close to that house. And got a positive response from planning, and also they are planning to do mitigation at 200%, so I think it certainly, in my opinion, meets the four findings of fact.
Any other input by anyone?
I would just reiterate that the Planning Commission component and the Design Adjustment Committee, both of those, and just from a public policy standpoint, it's just interesting to me that we're picking between longleaf pine trees and oak trees and trying to create that hierarchy there.
Is there anyone that has any comments or would like to make a motion?
I would propose that we approve the variance request for 525 Ponderosa Drive based on meeting the four findings of fact.
Is there a second?
Second.
Being seconded, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? That does pass. Before we move on, the first item we heard, did we correctly handle, there was two variances in that, and we only took one vote. I just procedurally want to make sure we didn't miss something.
It was my understanding that the board's intention was to vote to deny both of those.
It was, I didn't know if we needed anything.
No.
Okay, I just overcautious, sorry.
No problem.
Yeah. All right, thank you. All right, we'll move on. Welcome back. We'll move on to item number 3. Item number 3 involves 418 Worcester Street. It's a request for a variance to the off-street parking requirements and driveway access. We'll acknowledge the city.
Thank you, Chairman. This item is for the off-street parking location in the urban mixed-use district. This is the parcel. You can see that it's bounded by Worcester Street to the north, Dawson Street to the south, between 4th and 5th Streets. The property is currently vacant, but the applicant has proposed to develop with a multifamily mixed-use project. Pursuant to Land Development Code, Section 18340, parking facilities shall not occupy the corner of a block for a distance of 35 feet from the corner, nor be located within 20 feet of the right-of-way. Where 4th Street and Worcester Street rights-of-way connect on this property, the streets don't actually physically connect, and so it's unlikely that they ever would due to the topography. You guys have recently reviewed a project in this vicinity that had the same issue where there was no connectivity along 4th Street there. On June 6th, the applicant submitted an application for a variance to the sections of code pertaining to the location of the parking, stating that they plan to keep more than half of the proposed parking under the building, and the building itself is required to be within 10 feet of the property line in the urban mixed-use district. So this matter is set before the board today. I would like to enter the case summary and all of the attachments into the record. And I will note that one of the attachments was modified subsequent to originally sending the packet to you all, so I hope that you have the updated attachments. If not, we have those in this presentation, and the applicant has a presentation for you as well.
Yeah, I believe we received those as an email and then just was handed a hard copy, so we should be good. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Show that the applicant's agent is Matt Nichols.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Matt Nichols. I'm an attorney here in Wilmington, and I'm representing the applicant and owner in this variance request. We had a series of slides that I think will help explain the request and also the justification for the variance factors. And while that's being pulled up, with me here today is Rodney Williams, who is my client representative, and our architect, Clark Hipp, and our civil engineer, Howard Resnick. And so we hopefully are able to answer any questions you may have about the project and the variance requests. I know that the board members are very familiar with the vicinity. This property is really pretty uniquely shaped, and as we go through the slides, you'll see it's unique in a number of ways. It actually has 4 street frontages, and that'll come into play as we talk through a couple of the variances. It's 4th Street, Dawson Street at the bottom of the screen, and 5th Avenue, and then Wooster Street. And it's also on 2 corners, which is also, will factor into the request as we go and explain them. Here's just a different vantage point. You can see the Dollar General store on Dawson there at the bottom of the screen. And I've got some photos. Again, I know the board members are very familiar with the street in this vicinity, but this is 4th Street looking north from Dawson Street, and it is a dead-end street. The subject property is to the right, and as you go down, you'll see that it is a dead end, and there's a pretty significant grade change there. So I think as staff noted, it's probably unlikely that would ever be a vehicular connection. Turning around, and from that point, looking back toward Dawson Street south, you can see the subject property on the left. And then we'll point out that the intersection of Dawson and 4th Street is a stop sign only, and it's not signalized. And that will be another issue we'll bring up here in a minute. This is Dawson Street near the 4th Street intersection looking east. You see the subject property on the left. And this is looking north on 5th Avenue from the Dawson Street intersection. The subject property would be sort of in the distance there on the left, and that is a signalized intersection with a crosswalk. This is again looking north on 5th Avenue toward Wooster Street with the property on the left. That's looking back south from on 5th Avenue, that would be at the Wooster Street intersection. Again, the Wooster Street intersection is signalized. And this is a good photo to give sort of the intersection at Wooster and 5th Avenue. You can see the property there on the corner of 5th and Wooster. And you can see this is looking toward Cape Fear Memorial Bridge. And again, looking in the direction of the bridge, the property. And we'll talk here in a minute about the multifamily development across the street at the corner, at the other corner of Wooster and 5th Avenue. And there's some similarities in what we're proposing here, and a lot of it has to do with the grade change. As you approach the bridge, as I'm sure all the board members have done many, many times, it's a pretty significant grade change as you go down Wooster Street. And then coming back sort of full circle, this is Wooster, where you see the other side where the dead end of 4th Street is. So the variance requests, which we'll walk through with a series of diagrams, as Ms. Thurston pointed out, there was an update to the packet, and I apologize for this, but I have to make another update because the Exhibit A that was put in the packet was the original Exhibit A, but back in June, we submitted a revised Exhibit A, and unfortunately, that didn't get in the packet. So the only real differences are, originally when we were looking at this, we thought the variance would be up to 10 feet. I think that's what's in your packet for the first variance. But upon further evaluation and looking at the code and how it's worded, we really would require a 14-foot variance from the street setback for parking in the UMX. And then the second variance, which deals with the distance requirement from a street intersection, I believe we had it at 25 feet, but upon further review and being conservative in the measurement, we would require a 30-foot variance. So those are really the only two changes, but I do have that handout, Mr. Chairman, if you would like to have the revised Exhibit A.
Sure, if you have it, that would be
Okay,
great.
thank you.
Thank you.
And what I've done is included the email where we submitted it back in June, and then Ms. Francis, or Ms. Garman, Ms. Francis' email, just confirming receipt of it. And what I did was I just included that email and then attached the Exhibit A. The site plan in your packet is correct. And then I just tabbed where we, the change on the Exhibit A that we made.
Thank you.
And staff has been very helpful in this, so we appreciate that. We were trying to identify the distances and things. But if I may, Mr. Chairman, sort of walk through some of the site plan, and then that'll help explain the variance request, if I could.
Sure.
Thank you. So this is the site plan that's in your packet, and just real brief overview, and Mr. Hipp would do a much better job of explaining the project, but I'll give a very brief overview. It's a mixed-use project. It'll be 125 residential units with approximately 872 square feet of commercial space. The parking is, much of it is structured parking under the buildings. There'll be 3 buildings. You can see on the site plan the areas shaded in gray are where the 3 buildings will be. And the design, which I think is very efficient, put the majority of the parking under the buildings. And you'll see as you saw from the photographs, not only is it under the buildings, much of the parking is sort of subgrade, because you'll see from the slope. So, a couple things that I guess need to be noted are, there's really not an off-street parking requirement in the UMX district. I think that may have been one of the more recent changes. There is a bicycle parking requirement, but I think you can do a new development in the UMX and not have any off-street parking. But my client wants to provide the parking because I think that helps with the project. It helps with not putting all the parking on the street. There's a number of residences in the area. So we clearly think having off-street parking is a benefit to the project and to the vicinity. So we do want to try to provide for that parking. The first variances I'm going to talk about are sort of in the lower left-hand portion of the site plan shown there, and that's the corner of Dawson and 4th Street. And then when I go through those slides, I'll come up to the other side of the property, which is the Wooster and 5th Avenue side. So I'll start with the Dawson and 4th Street and show you how the parking is in relation to the property line. So the building, there's a 10-foot maximum front setback in the UMX. So the building can only be set back a maximum of 10 feet. I think the challenge and what kind of presents the ordinance here is we want to have under building parking, and the code is written says you have to set the parking back 20 feet. So it's not consistent. So I think that's one factor to look at, where this is just an unusual situation where I think the code and the policies favor structured parking. We want to provide that under the building. But we can't put the building back more than 10 feet, but the code's also saying you got to have the parking back at least 20 feet. So that creates the issue here. But we're providing a 6-foot setback along 4th Street, and we're providing a, let's see, I'm speaking in terms of the parking, that along Dawson Street, we're showing that from the property line to the first parking space is roughly 14.3 feet. And looking at the code, it's not entirely clear. It doesn't talk in terms of parking spaces, it talks in terms of parking facilities. So to be safe, what we've asked for is, and what we're going to ask the board for to consider, please, is a 14-foot variance along the street frontages. And that would allow us to have the buildings and the parking under the buildings. And the buildings sort of vary in their relation to the property line, but 14 feet would allow it. We don't need it in all the places, but to just accommodate like the stub out there for the turnaround, which if that's deemed part of the parking facility, then we would need a variance for that too. So that's that corner. And I'm glad to answer any questions. I hope I didn't make it more confusing than I needed to. Okay. So the second variance request, still staying in the same corner, is there's a provision in the code that says you have to set back your parking 35 feet from the corner of a block. It says parking facilities shall not occupy the corner of a block for a distance of at least 35 feet away from the corner. It's not clear if the corner is the curb line intersection or the property corner. We showed both. To be conservative about it, we would say the sort of area in orange that's further toward the top of the screen. That would be a 35-foot radius, and so we would respectfully ask for a variance for that area, which is, again, based upon an arc, to allow the parking facility under the building in that location. Moving up to the corner of Wooster and 5th Avenue, it's essentially the same issue. The building is closer to the street than 20 feet because it has to be, but the parking is required to be set back 20 feet. So along the top, we're having a 7-foot setback of the building. So up at the top of the screen along Wooster, we would need like a 13-foot variance. And then along 5th Avenue, again, it varies with the stub outs, but if the board were inclined to grant the variance based on the factors, then we would respectfully ask for 14 feet, and that would cover us on all sides. There is a part of the parking, well, let me move on. Yeah, I'm just showing again the stub outs there. And then again, the same issue with the radius, shown from the curb line intersection versus the property line, but the code would not allow us to have that under the building. So I'll talk real briefly. I understand the board would be familiar with the other property sort of further down Wooster Street, but the property along Wooster Street with these current multifamily developments has a similar type parking, is my understanding. So if you look at the sort of the back of that building, you can see the property is right up on the sidewalk, which is what the code requires you to do for the most part. And then the parking is under the building. You can actually see the grade change pretty good there. And then the building that's behind that, so the building closer to the bridge, is the same scenario. You can see the building is on the sidewalk, and going to the back of that building, you can see the parking. And this really shows the grade change pretty well here. And then we just highlighted again, the unique part of 4th Street there with it being sort of dead end on both sides of Wooster. So that's the sort of the parking variance request, if you will. I believe there's one section of the surface parking I can go back and show, but that would also require a variance. Again, it would be encompassed if the board were inclined to grant a 14-foot variance. But there's a little section of surface level parking along 5th Avenue that would fall within that 20 feet. But that's shown on the site plan. The second part of the variance request is for the access, and this is due to a provision in the code that says driveways shall not be located along a designated primary frontage if the site also has non-primary street or alley access. So this site is unique in that it's surrounded on 4 sides by street rights-of-way, 3 of which are designated primary frontages. So under the code right now, the only access you would be allowed to the site would be on 4th Street, which is not signalized. We would respectfully contend that allowing the variance to allow us to have the access on 5th Avenue would greatly enhance the site, the flow of the traffic, the safety. So that's essentially this issue. And I think it's really a function of it's just a very unique site, and I don't know if you'll find a site that's surrounded on 3 sides by the primary frontage streets. So this sort of shows the red lines there where access would not be allowed at any 3 of those sides because we do have access on 4th Street, which is really not the best access. It's sort of a great secondary access, but it dead ends and there's no light there. I would point out too, I don't think there's any parking on Dawson Street in that vicinity, on-street parking, or Wooster Street. So again, this is what's currently allowed under the LDC, and we would respectfully ask the board to consider a variance to allow us to have the access on 5th Avenue, which would due to the unique features of the site and its location and the primary frontage designations, we would respectfully contend would warrant the variance. So this would allow us to have accesses as shown here. And I won't go through these photos, but I think I just included them in here just if the board had any questions about 4th Street, if that was our only access. And we put this diagram to show you that if an access is not, if the variance is not granted, really that's really going to be our vehicular circulation pattern would be right there all at 4th Street, 4th Street and Dawson, not signalized, and the site would work so much better and be safer, I would contend. So that, Mr. Chairman, concludes the slide presentation. I'm glad to go through the 4 factors we outlined in the variance application, respectfully why we contend we meet all 4 of the criteria. I think this is a very unique site. It's uniquely shaped. You've got topography issues. You've got the streets are different on all 4 sides. And my client is really trying to accommodate and meet I think the intent and some of the preferred urban design principles that are in the code and the comp plan for having a very efficient design in this location. And these variances would help us accomplish that. The parking under the building would be there regardless. So the parking being under the building, we would contend is, the intent I think is to not have surface level parking right on the street. And that's really, the plan is the opposite of that, it's having it under the building. So again, I'm glad to go through any of the criteria that the board would like us to elaborate on. I'll see if Clark or Howard would like to add anything. Clark, please.
Clark Hipp, Hipp Architecture, Chairman of the Board. Just want to reinforce, I'm sure you'll recognize that asking for a 30-foot variance on a 35-foot requirement is significant. That 35 feet, or that 30 feet request is based on our application of the 35-foot requirement against our property line. If you take the 35 feet from the corner, it's a much smaller variance requirement that we would have to request for. And then secondly, it is a significant request, but the intent is to hide all of the parking under the building, very similar to the Pearl across the street and the mini Pearl. So the 35, those vehicles within 35 feet of the corner would never be seen from the roadway. So that's just something I wanted to reinforce.
Thanks. Thank you. Do you have anyone else you want to talk, or maybe we might have some questions for you? You can field them to whoever you would want to answer them to.
No, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that concludes our presentation. Again, we're here to try to answer any
Let me see who has, some may have questions now. Anybody have questions? My only one is, so the buildings, the way you have them on the site plan, the shaded area of the buildings that totally cover the parking. So it's in essence, the parking is sort of part of the building. It's just, it's sort of the way our code is written.
Yes, sir. I'll let Clark elaborate on that, but I would say it doesn't feel like the code was really written for this type of scenario. And so I think that's exactly why the variance process is in place, because you couldn't write the code for every scenario. And so this is a good example of why we have a Board of Adjustment to consider the specific facts of each case and see if the criteria meets why we should vary from the code. And we would contend in this case that this would be sort of a great case for a variance in the sense that it's meeting sort of the objectives of the code, but it's just a unique situation with the building.
Again, it's very similar to what you see. Can I scroll through?
Yes, sir. You can go the other way, actually. if
I
you wanna
want
see.
that last shot
Okay,
you
we'll go
had
this
up
way,
there.
yeah.
Okay. Keep going. One more. That's it. So it's very similar to this situation. Due to the topography of the site, the two buildings that face Fifth Avenue are handicap accessibility units will be in those buildings, so they will be at grade level, very similar to this. You see, they have grade level access off Fifth Avenue. To do that, we are anticipating excavating under the building to put the parking, and where we come out at the back, very similar to this structure, will basically be at grade because of the slope of the property. So the intent is, I would consider this structured parking. It's not a parking deck, but it is structured in the sense that it is covered and enclosed.
Yes, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? All right, thank you. Does the city have anything in regards to what the applicant brought up?
Any additional information, but are happy to answer any questions you may have of staff.
Okay. Anybody have staff before we move on? All right. Oh, yeah, yes, sir.
With the intent of the 20-foot setback with the parking, what was the reasoning? Was it just to keep cars so close to the main roads, or do you know the reasoning behind that large setback?
A lot of it was to protect the aesthetics from the streetscape and not have parking right along the street, because this is a district that's intended to be more of an active pedestrian area, and having cars directly along the rights-of-way doesn't align with that goal.
And then actually, I've got a question for the applicant as well. Will the downstairs, or where the parking is, will it be enclosed like the buildings that you just showed?
I'm going to ask Clark to answer that one, please.
The parking will be accessed from grade level. As I mentioned, Fifth Avenue is high. On the west side, the lower side, there'll be a garage door that will be accessed, and there'll be stairs that will lead up into the buildings along Fifth. The building that faces Dawson, the same method. You will come in from the back, and there'll be, in essence, a garage door opening. Drive in under the building, there'll be stairs up.
Okay, so it won't be on stilts where you'll see all the cars?
No,
It will be enclosed?
it will be enclosed. There will be some openings.
Yes.
But it will be probably concrete or concrete block or stucco to give it an attractive look.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, anything else? All right, we'll move on to the evidentiary hearing. At this time, anyone in the public that has information that's competent in material or substance, we'd ask that you come forward to present. Being there aren't any, we'll move on. Is there anything else from the applicant at all? Okay, thank you. Anything from the city?
No, thank you.
All right, we'll go ahead and close the evidentiary hearing. And didn't know if you have anything else, just follow up. If you're good, we'll move into deliberations. Okay, thank you. All right. Conversation. Anybody have any thoughts?
I'll take a shot first. I mean, I think the third variance is somewhat the most obvious to me. If you look at Dawson and Wooster as kind of the on and off ramps to the current Cape Fear Memorial Bridge and the future Cape Fear Memorial Bridge, access on Fifth Avenue seems to be the best solution to this problem. And then as far as the first two, Mr. Nichols really kind of talked about, you've got UMX where the code wants you to bring it to as close to the street as possible. And what they're doing is UMX plus parking. And the nuance of that and the grade of the site, I think it makes it obvious that 1 and 2 are merited also.
I agree. I think the underneath enclosed parking is really a better option than anything else. And I think the requested variances are certainly valid and meet the 4 findings of fact.
Anybody have any other comments or have a motion?
Make a motion that we grant the 3 variances as requested.
There's been a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. All right, thank you. We will move on to our first new business item of 5600 Eder Lane. This is a variance to the rear setback required in the R15 residential district pursuant to City Code Chapter 18 Land Development Code 18-28. Mr. Asher, we'll let you present.
Good afternoon. 5600 Eder Lane. The subject property is Lot 1R of the Pond Crossing subdivision as recorded in the New Hanover County Register at Map Book 34, page 230. The property contains approximately 12,091 square feet and contains a single-family dwelling structure that is approximately 1,717 square feet that was constructed circa 1995. The subject property is a R15 residentially zoned district. And on October 17, 2022, city staff issued approval for the construction of a 300 square foot addition to the rear of the single-family structure. The applicant is seeking a variance to the rear yard setback requirements for a single-family structure to encroach into the rear yard setback as approved by the permit 22-027033, which was also attached in the packet. Land Development Code Section 18-28 Dimensional Standards requires that a single-family structure in the R15 moderate density single dwelling district have a minimum rear yard setback of 25 feet. The structure plan submitted to the permit application indicated that the addition of the structure would be 300 square feet and would replace an existing deck that extended into the rear yard setback. Per section 18-442, setback encroachments, decks may encroach into the rear yard setback up to 8 feet. On or about February 16, 2023, zoning officer Philip Coates inspected the subject property and determined that the addition extended into the rear yard setback in violation of Land Development Code Section 18-28 Dimensional Standards, which requires a 25-foot rear yard setback. On June 20th, 2023, planning staff accepted an application for a 5.7-foot variance to LDC Section 18-28 Dimensional Standards to allow for the structure to remain with a 19.3-foot rear setback. This matter is set before hearing for the Board of Adjustment, August 17, 2023. I submit the packet and associated materials into the record, and this property is subject to the 4 findings of fact. Staff and the applicant are here for questions.
Does anyone have any questions for the staff right now? All right, thank you. We show the owner is Deborah Adams Wingate, and the appointee is Ingram Brothers.
Yes.
Also, the owner has arrived as well.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chairman, board members. Eddie Albright, 1706 Castle Street, Wilmington. Here to answer any questions. The owner is also here. We're in agreement with everything that the staff has said. The room is completed, and we'd just like to close the file.
Questions for the appointee? Anybody?
When you were building the accessory to the house or adding on to the house, were you aware of the setbacks whenever you were doing it, or?
We were issued the permit prior to any building started.
Okay.
Anybody have any other questions for the appointee? At this time, we can come back in a little bit if we have some.
Sure, thank you.
Yep,
All right,
thanks.
all right, thank you, sir. Does the city have any information to add into?
I will add, I mean, it is a uniquely shaped lot, and I didn't review the application, but city staff did sign off on the building permit as proposed and as constructed. Because of that, we did not charge the applicant an application fee because the city has the opportunity to waive that application fee when there is some error on the part of staff in the permitting process that necessitates a variance.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, does anyone have any other questions before we go to the next step? Okay, all right. We're going to move into the evidentiary hearing. I'll ask anyone from the public that would like to bring forth any information and materials that's substantive and relevant to this matter. Is there anyone that would, at this time? All right. While we're still in the evidentiary, is there anything else that anyone would like to ask the applicant or the city?
I just want to make sure I'm clear. So the permit was granted for them to build this, whatever, 300 square feet, right? And then it was built, and then it was determined that it was in the setback.
That's correct.
Okay.
Anybody else have anything while we're still in the, okay, all right, all right. Anything else, city, before we close? All right, we'll go ahead and close the evidentiary. Go into deliberations.
Well, I mean, I went by and, I mean, the addition's good, is well built, it looks nice, and it was permitted, it was built per the permit, and, you know, it was, you know, I guess an error on the city's part, so I think the four findings of fact have certainly been met, because it is already constructed, and it was constructed per the issued building permit.
I'd agree with that, Patrick.
Anybody, anything else to add? All right, entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve this.
There's been a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? It passes unanimously. All right. That ends the old and new business. Is there anything else from the city for today?
I would just like to congratulate you on your reappointment to the Board of Adjustment.
Yeah, I heard that. I didn't know that it was, I could have showed up at the public meeting. I don't know, but all right, well, thank you. Does anybody have anything? All right, well, we will adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.